Hi guys, I'm Beth and I'm the Executive Director of the Family Recovery Foundation. We're so happy that you're here. The foundation exists for all persons who love someone who struggles through addiction. So we're on Module 1 today, and there are 12 modules in the family program, and we're starting with a very, very important topic, which is what is addiction? I think for you as the family member, the one who loves someone who struggles through addiction and mental health, that it's imperative that you understand the nuance of addiction. And I'm going to explain it in a way that's similar to how I've been explaining it to those in treatment. I've been working in treatment for about 20 years now and have encountered quite a few people, amazing people, who struggle through addiction and mental health. And they also just deserve the dignity of understanding the nuance of what addiction is at its core. I think a family that's well educated in understanding how to navigate your loved one's disease component. Think of it that way. I'd like you to think of this as a disease component. We're going to talk a little bit about the neurotransmissions that run through the mind. We're going to talk about two main parts of the brain. A lot of times we think of addiction as a character issue, as an issue of value systems. I always tell those in treatment, it must feel like your behaviors don't match your value systems. I'm going to say that again. When I'm teaching CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, which is the leading modality in addictive disorders, I tell those who struggle with addiction, I bet you've been struggling with the fact that your behaviors don't match your value systems. And typically in the room, it'll get really quiet. And there will be a sense of, yes, that's exactly what's been happening. Because your loved one, most likely, 99.9% of the time, your loved one has a predisposition to having value systems that match you and match their spiritual self. And over time, when a certain population, it's about 10% or so, between 7 and 11% of people who start abusing drugs and alcohol, things start to happen in their brain, and we're going to talk about that today. And then over the course of time, these behaviors start to happen. And it can be really confusing to a family member, especially if your loved one is saying to you, maybe on a Tuesday, they're saying, I promise you. They're looking at you, they're looking at the kid, they're looking at grandma, and they're saying, I promise you with everything that I have, no matter what, this is not going to happen again. And then it's Wednesday night and they've relapsed. And then the following week they say to you, on my life, I promise you this is not going to happen again. And then 2 days later they're relapsing. It can be extremely traumatizing for the family to really not understand why someone would have behaviors that don't inherently match the truth of who we know our loved ones to be. We have an understanding. Maybe we remember before the addiction started to become prevalent in their lives, we have a sense of, I know who this person is. I know the core of who they are. And then over time, something starts to shift. And we start to see a different type of person show up. Lots of promises. Maybe there's been lying or stealing or those types of things. I'd like to explain to you why that's happening. So we're going to actually make this really simple for you. I'd like to do that. We're going to talk about two parts of the brain. We're going to start with, and remember we're on Module 1. You can go to the website. It'll be noted here on our channel. And just click on Module 1 and the curriculum will be there for you. So let me read the definition really quick and then we'll get into the two regions of the brain. So there's many definitions. Here's ours. Addiction is a chronic disorder characterized by the compulsive use of substances or engaging in a behavior despite harmful consequences. Behaviors despite the consequences. Remember that. It involves changes in the brain that affect self-control and the ability to resist the urge to consume the addictive substance or participate in addictive activity. So let's get back to the two regions of the brain. We're going to talk quickly about the cerebral cortex and the amygdala. So you can think front and back. Let's make it real simple. The front brain and the back brain. So your loved one has, you do too, we all do, but your loved one has a cerebral cortex in the front of their brain. And that cerebral cortex, how I teach it with addicts in treatment, is that's the executive function. I want you to think of the cerebral cortex as the part of the brain that's like the boss of you. This is the part of the brain that when you're driving a car and the light turns yellow, it activates. It tells you speed up or slow down. We need that part of our brain. That's the part of our brain that tells us that we should have moral behavior. That's the part, this is what I tell addicts in the room. That's the part of your brain that loves your family, wants to stay out of jail, wants to make the right decisions, has a morality to you. Okay? This is our regulator, executive function, all things rational. That's what happens here, okay? And it spans across your mind like this. Now there's another part of the brain called the amygdala. If you scroll down halfway through. Now the amygdala is something different, and you can read through the details here. There's a lot of research that's available for you. But the amygdala is a very different part of the brain, and I'd like you to think more about fight or flight. So rational thinking, and then we've got another lobe in the back that is more of our fight or flight mechanism. That part of the brain is not supposed to be running the show of anyone. That part of the brain should be ignited. That's the fight or flight response, the survival mechanism. I always say that's the part of the brain that activates when there's a mom and she's got to pick up the car, to get the baby out of the thing. It's the part of the brain that hijacks the brain that will create a survival mechanism full of adrenaline to keep us safe, to help us survive. So as you can see, they're very different mechanisms that these parts of the brains control. All things rational, all things survival. So there's a percentage of people that when they start using drugs and alcohol, that cerebral cortex will start to lose some of its activity level. We can look at Dr. Amen's brain scans. I'll quote it here on the channel, underneath, so you guys can find this information. But we see in Dr. Amen's brain scans that some people, once they start using drugs and alcohol, that cerebral cortex, there's parts of the brain that actually start to lose activity. Now, we don't lose that part of the brain. It's not like the part of the brain goes away. It's more along the lines of it's not activating anymore. So now let's go back to the scenario that we were talking about when your loved one says to you on a Tuesday, I promise. I promise. Where is that coming from? That's coming from their heart of hearts, their desire. Your loved one likely has a deep desire to stop using drugs and alcohol and would like to find their way to becoming the man or woman or person they were intended to be. But imagine not having the thing you need in order to get better. I'm going to say that again. Imagine not having the thing you need in order to get better. So when your loved one is looking at you like this with a full integritous desire and has your face in their hands and is promising you and holding you, I'm not convinced that they don't want that. I'm not convinced that that's not the deepest desire of their heart. It could be that if we were to SPECT scan their brain, which is what Dr. Amen does, if we were to SPECT scan their brain, they may not have activity in their cerebral cortex, which is the part of the brain they need in order to do the thing they want to do. You catch that? So then on Thursday, when there's a relapse, we're going to talk about triggers in just a minute. Maybe there's an internal trigger or an external trigger, or maybe they're going through a season of trauma or something's ignited them, whatever. As much as they have a deep desire to honor you and to honor their life, maybe their spiritual life, they may not have their cerebral cortex activated enough to do the thing that they've promised you to do. Okay? I hope that brings about some understanding on why your loved one would continue to have behaviors that could be so disheartening to themselves and to others, which is why recovery is so vital and so important. A lot of people think and struggle with wanting to do this by themselves, which is why we say, unfortunately, addiction can become extremely unmanageable. And when I share this content in treatment centers with addicts, sometimes they'll just stare and say, that's exactly what happened. I wanted to do that. No one believes me that I really wanted to get better. I just actually didn't know how. And sometimes there's actually a lot of tears in the room when I share this education, because it might be the first time they've actually had a framework around why they've been doing what they've been doing. So we really believe at the foundation that education can be a tremendous help for families. Once we are educated, we can start to make the adequate changes. Okay, so are you getting it? You getting that, Anthony? Front brain, back brain? Okay, so front brain, cerebral cortex, executive function, all things right and wrong. Back brain, amygdala, fight or flight, instinct. What happens in the cerebral cortex is once it starts to lose some of its activity level, that amygdala starts to take over and run the show. Imagine the brain being miswired, a maladapted neurocircuit that is now the survival mechanism is linked to drugs and alcohol. You follow? That is so important to learn. If the brain is wired towards survival to exist is connected to drugs and alcohol, what we will learn is that the addict actually goes into what we call an unconscious state. So once those triggers happen, an unconsciousness comes over, and your loved one is finding themselves in a fight or flight survival state. That may be why they're telling you one thing on a Tuesday and another thing on a Thursday. Okay. So I'd like to educate you a little bit as well on what are triggers and maybe understanding a little bit more about how your loved one can be triggered. The way we teach CBT in treatment centers, and we want the families to understand this as well, is there's two types of triggers. There's internal triggers and external triggers. So internal triggers can be emotional states, feelings of sadness or anxiety, negative thoughts, physical sensations that you're having, memories or boredom. It's really easy to understand. Internal triggers are the things that reside inside your body. So when your loved one goes to treatment, we're actually going through the internal triggers very specifically. We're writing them out. We're creating plans of attack, if you will. How are we going to be managing all those internal triggers? And that's our relapse prevention plan. And then there's external triggers. People, places, and things. That's how we teach it. All the people, this is how I say it in treatment. Your external triggers are all the people, all the places, all the things. That one guy who, no matter whenever he calls, you're finding your way to a relapse. That one liquor store on the corner, that one Walmart, that one drive home. There are so many things that can be a trigger for your loved one. And post-treatment, we're actually navigating those external triggers by saying maybe we're not attending weddings for a year, maybe we're not going to baseball games, maybe we are supplementing those types of activities with sober activities. Because imagine this, if the cerebral cortex needs time to actually find its way back to an active state, we really want to keep our loved ones and educate them on keeping them out of harm's way. So just for a while, we want to in essence, have a beautiful protective layer around them, because as much as there's desire and your loved one may be coming home from treatment at 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, their cerebral cortex may not be fully activated yet. And then all of a sudden there's an internal or external trigger and they chronically keep finding themselves in a relapse. So there are things that we can do as family members to help our loved ones function in a way and create parameters. Maybe your home becomes newly alcohol-free. Maybe instead of attending the bridal shower with your whole family or the soccer game where there's going to be alcohol, maybe there are things that we can do to reduce the harm. I think family members, while educated on addiction, can demonstrate a level of compassion for the newly sober person in understanding that it really just takes time for the brain to heal. Lastly, for this module, there's something in the last, I've been teaching maybe for about 20 some years or so, and in the last 5, some of my research led me down the road of spirituality and really bringing in spirituality and clinical care and offering a modality to my work that helps people not only understand the science and the psychotherapeutic modality for healing and relapse prevention, but as I started studying spirituality in its offering, I started to realize that a lot of spiritual teachers were talking about addiction as a level of unconsciousness. And the more I reflected on that, having sat with so many people for so many years, I started to really take that into account. Maybe our sobriety brings us to an awake state. Maybe your loved one's sobriety and their sober time all of a sudden wakes them up and brings them to a state of consciousness. And maybe in their use state, it could potentially be a level of unconsciousness. I'm hopeful that that will help you understand that when your loved one is behaving in ways and there's triggers in their lives that are causing them to do things that may not match their value systems, I'd like you to remember that. I'd like you to remember that addiction at its core can present as unconsciousness. And what we love about recovery and what we love about sobriety is, in essence, it wakes your loved one up. And when they're awake, in their awakened state, that's where we can start implementing the new skills and the new behaviors that actually match the truth of who they are. So if you're having a hard time wrapping your mind around the why, we're really hoping this education helps. We look forward to seeing you on our upcoming modules. Module 2 is right around the corner, and we'll see you soon. Bye, guys. Bye.